mentioned earlier, this is the timeline for proceeding with the project that was analyzed as part of the San Anselmo Flood Risk Reduction EIR back in 2018. So we would move ahead with the project design, have the 100% design plans and specs for the building. As part of that, there has already been a submittal to FEMA to basically to go through this no-rise certification. We've had extensive communication with FEMA staff and with their engineers. The submittals would go into DC this month. FEMA staff have informed us it could take up to 6 to 9 months to receive this certification, and it have to be certified by the town of San Anselmo, by the floodplain administrator, which is your public works director. And then in addition to that, there would be some an addendum to the existing EIR that would be required to analyze the Baffle structure, as well as there would be minor permit amendments to the permits that the regulatory permits from the state and federal agencies that the flood district has already received for construction of the Baffle. But the construction is programmed for next summer. And right now, the downstream flood mitigation design and construction is on hold, but the construction and the removal of Building Bridge 2, that could proceed as early as next summer. So just want to thank you for your time, and I'll wrap it up. Our project manager, Hugh Davis, was unable to join us tonight. And then if there are any questions for the Corte-Madera Creek project, Joanna Dixon is the manager, and her information is here on the screen. And then, of course, any other questions to floodinquiry@marincounty.org. Our next Flood Zone 9 Advisory Board meeting is scheduled for July, August. So if you sign up through rossvalleywatershed.org, you'll receive the meeting notifications when that next meeting is scheduled. So, thank you.
Thank you, Liz. And will that presentation be available to council and to members of the public?
Yes, I will send it to Dave and to staff this evening.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Councilor Burke, would you like to, sorry, we're going to move on to questions of staff. Councilor Burke, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Liz, for the presentation. I really like the graph with the options because it helped me kind of just get an idea of where we are. I do have a few questions. Have the 20 downstream properties that have been identified as potentially needing mitigation, have you determined what mitigation is required on each of those?
We started that. So when the engineers went out and did the initial surveys of the first finished floors, and also looked at the lowest adjacent grade and trying to determine, we weren't able to gain access to all of the properties, but based on some prior surveys, it's roughly, we saw about 5 properties that needed home elevation. Then there were some other properties, a remainder of them, some type of flood mitigation, and that flood mitigation work is still being determined. We would need to go out and do some additional survey work on some of the parcels where we weren't able to reach property owners the first time.
Okay, so just at this point, those owners don't know what you think would be required and what it would cost or what you propose to do.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a very, very early estimates at this time.
And
preliminary estimates.
If we go with the Baffle design, does that assist those homeowners at all in flood mitigation?
So the downstream property owners, their flood risk would remain the same. So many of those property owners are within the floodplain now, so they're within the 100-year floodplain, so their risk would not change with construction or installation of that Baffle.
They continue to remain vulnerable.
Right, and the water elevation on their property, the goal with the project with the Baffle is that the elevation downstream would remain the same. It wouldn't change.
Okay. Are there funds available for mitigation on those downstream properties? There
are funds, competitive funding that's available through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA.
What I mean is, do we have those funds?
No, we would, if we wanted to go out and secure additional funds, that's one option.
Okay, so I want to be sure I understand that if we installed the baffles, it would provide no flood mitigation to those downstream owners, and we have no money for flood mitigation at this point for them. Is that correct?
There's a limited amount of funds for flood mitigation downstream.
Okay, and the Baffle project, has it been certified or signed off on by FEMA at this point?
So all of the documentation that's required and the model runs, and it's extensive. So the engineers are just wrapping up the package that's going to be delivered to FEMA this month.
And do you have any indication from them whether you expect approval of that design or not?
So the engineers have been working very carefully with FEMA over the last couple of months, and we've received, no indication that they wouldn't approve it, but they first have to do their review and do their due diligence of the packet that's submitted by the flood district.
Okay, and then you mentioned certification by the town or through our Department of Public Works chair. Even if FEMA certified that the baffles did nothing, but we as a town elected to first mitigate downstream residents, not spend money on something that did no mitigation, we don't have to certify them, right? The Baffle project at all.
As far as that, I'm going to refer that to your floodplain administrator, Sean Condry or Scott. I don't know which of them, with your Public Works Department.
Well, I guess my question is, what is it we have to certify?
So the no rise, the certification of the no rise, once it came back from FEMA and FEMA said, yes, we agree with your calculations, we agree that there's no rise, the town of San Anselmo would have to also sign off on that no rise.
And when you say we have to sign off, does that mean that we are accepting any form of liability if there is in fact a rise?
I can't respond to that question.
Well, do you know why it is we have to sign off at all?
Because your town has a floodplain ordinance.
Yeah. So I could just answer part of this. As a floodplain manager, if someone shows that there's a no rise certification, typically the floodplain manager, as part of FEMA, would have to sign off on that unless they can show that there was an issue or a rise.
Okay, I think that's all my questions. And again, I really appreciate the presentation.
Thank you, Eileen. Vice Mayor Berto, questions of staff?
No questions at this time. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Colbert, questions of staff?
Yeah, just a question for you, Mayor Feynman. This is update only. There's going to be public comment. Are we going to have an opportunity to get back to Liz after public comment too?
I think that's reasonable.
Okay, all right. So then I guess, Liz, thanks for coming. And I guess my question is this: in terms of, and I realize this is information only, in terms of the decision making, I think it's important for the community to hear what's the relationship between Flood Zone 9 and the town of San Anselmo in terms of decision making. And I guess the last piece I'll put into that before you respond is, right now the property is owned by the flood zone, correct?
That's correct.
So can you lay out where exactly this decision is going in terms of the options you laid out? I think that'd be helpful.
Yes. So the next step would be a presentation to the Flood Zone 9 Advisory Board, returning to them in July or August with a recommendation on whether to proceed with the initial scenario. The scenario, let's call it scenario number 1, which is removal of the building bridge and then construction of the baffle, and proceeding with that option. So that this would return to the Flood Zone Advisory Board for discussion, the recommendation. That recommendation would then be brought to the District Board of Supervisors, acting as the Flood District Board of Supervisors for a recommendation. If there was a recommendation for whichever scenario, is agreed upon that we would move forward with, that recommendation would first be brought to the Flood Zone 9 Advisory Board, and then followed by a recommendation by the District Board of Supervisors.
And then it would come back to the town?
Presumably, we would return to your town council before going to the District Board of Supervisors.
Okay, all right. That is helpful. The other thing is, we as council members, which are now part of the public record, we've been giving a fiscal accounting of the expenditures on the part of the flood district in terms of those funds. Would it be possible for you to provide an accounting to our council, so we could sort of review that and have an understanding of the revenues and the expenditures?
Yes, I can work with your staff to schedule a follow-up.
I'd appreciate that. No additional questions at this time, Mayor Feynman.
Thank you, Councilmember Colbert. I think both of you, Eileen and Brian, asked a lot of the questions that I was wondering about, and I think it's probably best if we move on to public comment. But there may be some additional questions of staff after public comment. So if you're a member of the public, please do go ahead and raise your Zoom hand. You will have 3 minutes to share comment, and there's a timer, and at the 30-second mark, it dings. So when you hear the ding, that's your notice to wrap it up. Thank you.
Cathy Schaeffer, you are now able to unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Cathy Schaeffer. I was, at the time the FEMA maps were produced, I was the FEMA Region 9 engineer responsible for the mapping that you all are addressing in your response. I want to just point out a couple of things. First of all, I want to send an appreciation to Liz Lewis for her always continued really great explanation of how things work and all the great work that she's doing. But I also want to just, having looked at some of the comments that you all have received, I want to point out that the floodway designation that you're wrestling with is in fact an artificial designation that FEMA creates as a way to ensure that the base flood elevation or the base flood flows through the channel and is not obstructed by development. And so it is an artificial construct. And what I would like to offer and recommend is perhaps that I work with Liz to create a short video to kind of explain why it is we do this and kind of the artificial construct. Yes, you do have to adhere to those rules and regulations, but I want to just kind of point out that it is intended to ensure that a base flow flows through the channel even as you develop. And so I just want to point that out, that there's some confusion as to kind of how it works and the regulations, and perhaps a solution would be to have a short video to explain that in more detail. That's the end of my comment.
Thank you, Cathy. Next public comment.
GGP, you are now able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. It's Garril Page. Good evening. I would like to say, first of all, that certification that was discussed means the Baffle is in place. I think it is important for everyone to ask the question, what is the design life of that Baffle? Should it be put in place? Because what it is doing is replicating the constriction of Building Bridge 2 that the project was designed to remove until they realized there was a no-rise requirement, which was not met. The removal of Building Bridge 2 platform would be accompanied by the cost of daylighting the creek, stabilizing the wall for the right bank, stabilizing the left bank, buttress for the replacement of the pedestrian bridge, and revegetation, plus additional expenses such as the contract to MGE and peer review, which I wonder if that's finished, and the cost also of the addenda to the EIR, which the EIR was $1,350,000. So that is not going to be an inconsiderable sum. So we have a baffle in place for an uncertain amount of time, restricting any flood improvement for people up and downstream of this baffle. I would like to ask, it seemed as though it wasn't possible, but I would like to ask if there is any way to remove that platform without incurring those expenses, and if so, what costs and consequences would be incurred. The 100% design, I think, is very important. I hope it will be delivered with fanfare and the public will know where it is and how to access it. I would certainly like to see it. And I also am curious whether the 20 or so people have been contacted. Do they know they are going to be affected? The competitive funds for the mitigation, Liz needs to be clear that there were over 60 applications and one of those grants was given last time we did this. They are very competitive. And I will stop because I'm sure I'm out of time. Thank you.
3 minutes exactly. Thank you, Garril. Next public comment.
Ross, you are now able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and council members. I spoke here recently about the incredible waste of time, money, and carbon emissions that is San Anselmo's participation in Flood Zone 9. The flood zone has burned through over $34 million. That is staggering. About all we've done is bought 3 properties and dug 1 hole in the ground. The staff and consulting costs in the past 13 years totals about $25 million. We have $4.2 million available in collected fees at this time, and the flood fees in the coming years will total about $23 million. The question at hand is how much longer are we going to stand